I am bringing in now to the conversation Jason Toy. He is a MRN reporter, and we haven't had Jason on since before the Daytona 500. So now that it's 7 races in, I thought, well, shucks, let's just talk some NASCAR today. So, Jason, thanks for joining me. And let's go back and talk about the race on Saturday night in Texas. Greg Biffle really just took over there at the end, and he was a dominant car throughout most of that race.
Yeah, he was, definitely. It was kind of a two-car deal throughout that race between him and Jimmy Johnson. And, Jimmy ended up leading the most laps in that race, but Greg was up front at least 7 times in that race. And that has become a track that has been dominated by Roush Fenway, not only in the Cup Series, but also in the Nationwide Series. Carl Edwards, prior to the Nationwide race Friday night, had won like 3 straight, and it continued on with Roush Fenway with Ricky Stenhouse picking up the win. And then, of course, Carl's won numerous times at the for the Cup race, too. So, once again, Roush Fenway back up on top. But Greg Biffle, for his ride so far this year, they have been very consistent. That's been the big thing for him, is consistency. Even though this is the first win, they've been up there in the top 5 mostly every race, with the exception of 1 or 2. But they have, now padded that points lead out to 19 now, which is huge for them at this early stage of the game. But they made a crew change at the start of the season, which really kind of shook things up and made things a little bit better, too. So Greg is definitely on rails right now, and actually could be poised, Brett, if things continue on. And it's hard to, that old saying, it's easy to get to the top, the hard part's staying there. Well, the hard part's going to be is him staying there throughout the rest of this year, and then once they get through the chase, if he's going to have a championship, it would be unique, the fact that he's won a truck title, he's won a nationwide title, and he could possibly win a Cup title, too, which is making the first time to do that.
Wow, that's impressive there. I mean, he has been on a run, and it seems like every week he is, like you said, being consistent, being in the top 5. If not winning, he is close. He's always there. He's in the conversation each and every week.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big thing about him. And, that's the one thing we've seen with Greg here the last couple of years, is the fact that they would have good runs but no finishes to show for it, and it's that consistency thing. You don't have to win every single week, but you got to be consistent, and that's the biggest thing for them this year, and they've been consistent.
With that race back on Saturday night, I know it had I can't remember the total amount of laps that were under green there at the end, but I mean, it's the longest green flag run, I think, in the history of NASCAR. I mean, it was just like there was hardly any cautions at all during that race.
So, you look at it, matter of fact, I have the race report here I'm looking at, and they only had 2 caution flags, total of 10 laps, and that first one didn't come out to lap 68. And then they went from lap 71 to 95, green flag, 5 laps of caution, went back to it at 100, and, of course, went the final, 234 laps of green flag racing, which was huge. 100 was 160-something mile per hour average speed, and running the 500-mile race in just a little over 3 hours, just purely amazing. But they had a lot of elements to battle in that race, too. I know if you saw the TV broadcast of it, of how windy it was there.
Well, yeah.
And believe me, I've been at Texas, and we do the truck race there at mid-season with the Indy cars, and we do it at the end of the season when we're there for the second Cup weekend. And I set up on that turn 4, calling the race there, 2 years ago. That is the coldest I've ever been in my life, is when that breeze is hitting you up there. So it definitely gets windy out there. What
do you think the reason was for that long green flag racing? Is it the track itself, where it's kind of wide, lends you to passing easier? What was the biggest thing with that long green flag?
I think it's the biggest. That was the big part of it, is the fact that you have so many different lanes of racing to be able to work with, and it allows cars to get spread out. So you're not, if somebody bobbles, they're not taking somebody else out because you have enough room for correction. Now, Trevor Bayne was out towards the wall, and the wind kind of caught him a little bit, and he overcorrected, so the back end kicked out. He was close enough to the wall where he made contact, but didn't contact anybody else. And then, of course, Jimmy Johnson there towards the end was trying to give everything he had, got it up in the loose marbles up on the top side, and just grazed the wall. So you can find different lanes to work with and be able to avoid having contact with anybody else at that track. And there wasn't that opportunity where they were bunched up so much too. So there was a lot less opportunity for them to have a caution pump come out. But I think also too, it's hats off to Goodyear, because they did a lot of extensive testing there just a couple of weeks ago for Goodyear tire, and Goodyear brought a really good tire that would have a steady drop off, not the big huge drop off, but a steady drop off, to give them a good run through the fuel run, so they didn't have tire issues too.
Yeah. That race Saturday begins a long stretch of racing for the NASCAR series, where they actually don't have an off date weekend until July 22nd. So, I mean, a lot of big races coming up. You got Kansas, Richmond, Talladega, of course, coming up here in just a little bit. Of course, the All-Star race and Charlotte race as well. This is becoming a very important stretch of races for these teams coming up over the next 6, 7, 8 weeks.
Yeah, this is always kind of the dog days. Even though we haven't gotten in the summer yet, this is kind of the dog day part of the schedule, because you're going to be constantly busy every weekend. Now, granted, they get back for the All-Star weekend, and the teams get 2 weeks at home in their own bed. Now, that's big, but it's it's definitely going to be the stretch run here for him for a while, and they get that one-off weekend and then back at it again through the final stretch, too. So this is why they make all the big bucks.
Yeah, exactly.
It costs them a lot of money to do this because you got to be committed to every other weekend like you have to like this, and you got to be on your A game every weekend.
How tough is it? I was looking at the schedule, and I see on May the 6th they're at Talladega, and then the next or 6 days later they're at Darlington. How tough is it to go from a super speedway down to a short track?
It's going from a track like that to Darlington, because at Talladega, your mind is constantly racing because you're trying to figure out drafting.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a big wide area to be able to work with. But when you go to Darlington, it's like you intensify it even more because you're thinking so much, but you also got a lot more action in the car because your tires, are going to be gone after the first couple of laps at Darlington because it will just eat up the tires. So that kind of mindset changes a little bit. Now, for a veteran driver, they're used to it. They know what to expect. But when it comes to a younger driver coming in, that's maybe in first, second, third, maybe even third year, you're still having to get adjusted to blocking out the style that you're driving at Talladega to this one. I always thought it was really neat when they would do Talladega and come back and run Martinsville next week. That one was really amazing.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about it. And we're talking to Jason Toy here on In the Zone with Fred and Angela on this Monday afternoon, talking some NASCAR as they're 7 races into the season. One of the most consistent racers you've talked about earlier is Greg Biffle. Another one is Dale Earnhardt Jr. I mean, he's number 3 right now in the standings. He's 19 points out. Still has not had a win. But I mean, you talk about consistent racers. He might be having the best season he's had.
He has, and of course, but it's Dale Earnhardt Jr. and everybody wants to see him in victory lane. So the pressure is still on to come out with that victory, and he hasn't been able to do that yet. Now he's had top 5 runs. We talked about that consistency, and you mentioned it, Fred, that he has been the consistent 1-2 for Hendrick Motorsports so far this year because, Jimmy Johnson was inconsistent beginning. He's now starting to pick it up. Same thing for Jeff Gordon as well. Casey Kane, who was inconsistent at the whole, basically part of the season up until this weekend, hasn't been able to produce as well. But Dale has been there week in and week out, but he just haven't found victory lane yet. And, you go back to like Martinsville, they came down pit road when, they probably shouldn't have come down pit road or something like that. But things have worked out to where he's battled back. And I think that's where that communication between him and his crew chief continuing to get better and better. And I think before not, you're going to see him in victory lane. It could possibly be this weekend at Kansas where he runs pretty well.
Yeah, of course, you look at the schedule coming up. He's got some tracks where he races well. Of course, Kansas, as you said, Richmond, where he has won before, Talladega, of course. So, I mean, he's got the next 3 weeks could be a possibility for him to get in the victory lane.
Yeah, definitely. And that would be, how huge would that be for the sport of NASCAR to have him, quote unquote, the main star. He hasn't won championships or anything like a Jimmy Johnson has or championship period, but he is the face of NASCAR. And that's what, I think as a sport, NASCAR needs him to get in the victory lane, to earn his way in the victory lane.
I want to talk a little bit about on the Nationwide Series, a couple of guys, because, I mean, you've got some really good young drivers coming up when you look at that Nationwide Series, whether it's Stenhouse Jr. or also Austin Dillon coming up, but of course, Danica Patrick is there as well. Those 3 names, 3 biggest names right now nationwide as far as bringing the sport back up to where it used to be, because it did slack off a little bit.
Oh, yeah, it did. And I think, to me, personally, I think the biggest thing with the Nationwide Series is they try to go to the big same tracks that they run the Sprint Cup every week. And that's the problem I think it's hurt, because the roots of this series was on the short tracks, like the Hickories and the Myrtle Beaches and those places. The unfortunate side of things, though, is the promoters of those tracks just don't have the money to pay the purses that these guys have to have. So they're going to tracks that they basically can handle the purse that needs to be paid. So that's the unfortunate side of it, because this series really should be on tracks like, occasionally, run Daytona once a year or run, other places like that. But you got to incorporate in there like the Hickories and the, perfect example this past weekend, the Truck Series went back to Rockingham. Well, actually, for the first time, the Truck Series went to Rockingham, but NASCAR went back to Rockingham. And it was a great race. Everyone was excited to go back to it because of how unique Rockingham is, but that's a shorter track that really bodes itself well for a NASCAR or a Nationwide Series that they should be running at. And probably next year, you probably will see the Nationwide Series go back to a track like Rockingham, but they need to have more of those on the circuit.
And of course that, and also I think it gives a chance for fans that can't get to a NASCAR race, maybe can't afford to go to a Nextel race, maybe go to some of those smaller tracks, start following these drivers as they're coming up.
Yeah, that's exactly how it used to be back. You go back to the 70s and 80s and even the very early 90s when you were running the tracks up and down the East Coast, like like we said, like the Hickories and the Myrtle Beaches and the South Bostons and whatsoever, that those fans could be able to come out and catch a race and check out stars that are coming up, like Dale Earnhardt Jr. when he was, and a lot of these other series, then be able to go to these small tracks and be able to see good racing. You know, because you can get on these big tracks, these mile and a half, and it's just follow the leader. That's where you get back to true racing. So hopefully they can get back to it. You know, I think it'll be interesting is to see, and I know there's mixed reviews on it, but the fact of having the NASCAR Nationwide Series running at Indianapolis this year on the big track and going away from the small track, which was the traditional track on the circuit for them. You know, that was one of the originals. And they've gone away from it to go to the big track because of all this. It's a big political deal with NASCAR, which NASCAR also owns the Grand Am Series, to be able to have Grand Am race there. They wanted to make it a full weekend, so they took the Nationwide race away and brought it there. So that one might be one of those ones that gets strung out too. But then again, you're going to have everybody and their sister trying to put a car into that race because it's Indianapolis.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And also on the Nationwide Series, Elliott Sadler having a great year right now, leading the points. You think he's getting close to getting back into a Nextel Cup car?
You know, I don't think so. You know, because he's ran a couple of the Sprint Cup races so far this year. But I think the biggest thing for him, again, goes back to consistency. He's in a consistent ride and been driving that 2-car now for Richard Childress, which used to be Kevin Harvick's ride. But it was to keep him in there to be able to build his confidence back up. He has success in there as well. You might see him if he can win the championship this year, which now makes it even harder because Stenhouse has just been on a roll lately.
Yeah.
But you could probably see him staying in that series because he can make a good living in it. And he can find himself in victory lane like he has a couple of times already, which he hasn't seen victory lane in a long time on the Sprint Cup Series side.
And, of course, a lot of talk has been about Austin Dillon. Have you seen him racing, and what makes him such a special racer?
Yeah, I've seen Austin several times. I've interacted with Austin quite a bit, actually, through the Truck Series and when he was coming in, and now his younger brother, Ty, who's, to me, I think Ty is probably the better of the two drivers. But it's, he has great equipment. He's got the best equipment out there on the track. That's a given. Yeah. But his driving talent, where you can see him absorbing in some of the input that he gets from not only his granddad, but his dad, who's Mike Dillon, who was a race car driver who works at RCR as a kind of an operations guy, but the crew chiefs and everybody. He listens, and he takes that and incorporates that into his driving style. Now, is he like a Kyle Busch where he's fearless type? No. I think he's aggressive, but he also thinks about where he's going to be aggressive at and when he needs to not be aggressive. And I think the consistency with that is very, very good. And like on the other side of it too, Ty, who's now working his way into the Truck Series this year to get used to the heavier style of race car than what he has been driving. That's been the great training tool of the Truck Series, is to be able to get in a seat week in and week out, to be able to do that, to get that consistency that he needs. And so far, it's paying off. He hasn't picked up a win yet, but I guarantee you'll see Ty Dillon in victory lane somewhere this year in the Truck Series. So, but he's a very good, aggressive driver that is smart, and he has great car control. And that's the biggest thing in these series. You got to have car control. If the car is going to break out on you, how you be able to correct that and not put it in the wall. And that's one thing with those two brothers they've been able to do, is they've got outstanding car control.
Okay. Sounds good. Hey, one question for you coming up this week now with Kansas. This will be a final question. I know we talked about Junior. This is a track that he's ran well. Give me some other names that, well, of course, is the same guys that usually that in the conversation each and every week. Tony Stewart's had a good start to the season with a couple of wins. Matt Kenseth and, of course, Greg Biffle. Is those the same names you're going to hear again this week in Kansas?
Well, I think the other names you'll hear about too is Tony Stewart. Obviously, I think Tony had a down win this past week at Texas, but you'll see him back at Kansas. Carl Edwards always runs well at Kansas too, because he considers that to be his home track, along with Clint Boyer, who both of them are from that area. So, but I think too, also you got to look at Keselowski. He didn't have the finish. He had some mechanical issues at Texas this past week, but he has been very good with his runs this year and working his way back towards that top 12 once again. But he obviously has been in victory lane, but I think he's picked up a win at Kansas before, and he did it on a fuel mileage run. So I think you'll see him up there running for the win. And who's to say about with Jimmy Johnson, who's running well there, but Casey Kane, who had a big weekend. We talked about these Hendrick drivers and trying to get consistent. Of course, Hendrick's trying to find that 200th win or Sprint Cup Series win for the organization. Casey had a great run in the Nationwide Series. He finished up in the top 10 in the Cup Series, which he desperately needed. I mean, after the runs he's had, and then he backs it up on Sunday and goes and jumps in the truck at Rockingham and comes away with a win. Now, what's that say to a lot of people? Well, if you can win, it builds your confidence back up. Doesn't matter what series you're driving in; it's going to build your confidence back, and maybe Casey might even see him up to the front as well.
Well, how big for the sport of NASCAR if Hendrick gets his 200th win and Junior is the one who gets it for him?
Oh, it'd be huge. It'll be all over the place.
Exactly right. Hey, Jason, man, I appreciate the time talking to us about some NASCAR going on, and I know we'll talk again as the season wears on.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. But you got to make sure one thing. Got to make sure Angela's back in there with you.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do that. Jason Toy from MRN Radio. Thanks a lot, man.
See you, buddy.